Unless you say who you are. Okay, so let's go a little further into chapter 1. There are 7 perspectives related to psychology, 7 primary. There are a lot of areas, but there are 7 primary. Now, one of those is psychodynamic. What I'm going to do is tie psychodynamic to psychoanalytic. Now, not that you're going to be responsible for it yet, but it at least gives you an idea. So, psychodynamic is very closely related to psychoanalytic. Now, the way that they are related is that psychoanalytic focuses almost solely on the unconscious. So Freud, Jung, other psychoanalytic psychologists and psychiatrists say, well, the majority of our development is genetically predisposed. So it effectively means that my thoughts, actions, feelings, my initial consciousness is as a result of genetic transfer from my parents, my grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever. And so the foundations of those thoughts and behaviors get transferred genetically, and then as a result, our lives are really a function of our subconscious, our unconscious. And with that, that's okay. And so they believe that developmental issues or success in development, all of those things are as a result of this embedded or innate unconscious. Now, the difference between the two, psychodynamic also says that the unconscious is responsible. However, it says our environment can change the state of that unconscious. So for instance, let's say, just as an example, that your grandparents were some really mean people, right? And so if they were driven by their unconscious and they had these really mean thoughts, then theoretically, you, through your parents, from the grandparents, may have an unconscious that's structured around being mean. Yes, sir?
So, what happens when the person sheds and heals from whatever situation may have caused these thinking patterns? If they heal and change their thinking cycle and they reproduce, does it still pass on, or because they overcame and shed, does that kind of open up room for a new slate?
That's an interesting, complex, but very good question, because it's mostly dependent on the nature of those sub-programs that are responsible for your unconscious thinking. And now outwardly, they may have shed them and behaved differently, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have changed their thinking, right? As we tend to do sometimes, we take on a persona that's not really ours, but we do it so that we can fool people. So the innate nature of their thoughts will tend to be the driving force, which is why sometimes you may see someone who does something really out of character and say, wow, I never knew that they were capable of that. I never knew that, right? So those embedded thoughts may have then surfaced.
So unless you change the whole foundation, then it's just...
Now, again, it's not 100%, but if you don't change the foundation, that becomes the nature. When you get into an anxiety position or stress position, one of the things we'll talk about is when you are stressed or in an anxiety condition, your brain redirects the blood flow and oxygen flow from the brain. Now, not all of it, but it takes a large portion of it because it wants to make sure that you can either fight with much more vigor than you ever did before, or you can run away much faster than you would have. So it focuses on the muscles and the lungs, And so it redirects some of that flow, which means we don't think when we get angry.
So theoretically, if you control your breath, you can control your emotions.
You can manage them better. I won't say that you can control them, but you can manage them better. Yes.
Could I add to what
Sure,
you're saying?
go ahead.
So my family's got lots of anxiety, and it's not quite that I don't have anxiety, it's just that I realize I have anxiety, so I can better manage those emotions, but I get the anxiety from way down the line.
Yeah, we can, and that's absolutely right. We can have genetic signatures that are passed down from our parents or grandparents. But it doesn't mean that those signatures will manifest themselves. You know, for someone whose parents have high blood pressure or diabetes, you may have that signature, but if you change the nature of what you eat and you exercise and do all of those, the signature is still there. It just doesn't come to fruition. It doesn't manifest itself. Right? Okay. So that's the only difference between psychodynamic and psychoanalytic is that psychodynamic says that the environment can influence that change in us so that the unconscious is not the only driving factor. We can change the nature of what that foundation is. Behavioral, at this level, is also introspective. It means, what are the behaviors that that person exudes, right? So, how do I act? Am I an angry person? Am I a shy person? Am I an extrovert, an introvert? So this is only about the individual. So behavioral psychology is simply about how do individuals manage their actions, behaviors, reactions, responses. Humanistic is also about the individual, but mostly, if not solely, about the positive nature of individualism. How do I help that person become more self-aware? How do I help that person be more self-confident? Right? So have a level of self-efficacy, self-concept. All of those things about making the person believe in him or herself. That's humanism. Cognitive is simply thoughts. How do we think? How do we remember? How do we store memories? How do we take information and catalog it in a way that is accessible? And what are the pathways, which we will talk about in Chapter 2, what are the neurological pathways that allow us to transfer information from one part of our body to the next? So cognitive is about our thoughts and how we think and what drives our behaviors, but it's about the thinking, not the behavior. Biological, again, we'll talk about in Chapter 2. What are the functions of the brain that cause different responses, different actions, different feelings? And so we will look at the neurological system, and then we'll talk about how neurons actually transfer information. As a start, we have hundreds of thousands of neurons. Now, this is just a crude drawing, but we have billions of these things. And those are throughout our body, head to toe. An interesting fact, though, is that none of the neurons are physically connected. So all of those billions of neurons that we have in our bodies, they are all separate. And because they are separate, there has to be something that excites or stimulates them to either transfer information or accept information. And that's going to be part of what we talk about here. So think about your cell phone. Do you have a cell phone? Would you call that person with the red mask? Would you call her now?
Yeah. Possibly.
Okay. Now, what's the chance that you're going to make the connection? Do you know her number?
No.
All right. So you can dial away, but if you don't have the right connection, that signal doesn't go anywhere. And then sometimes you may have the right connection, but I may not want to talk to you right now. Please. Right? So our neurons have electrochemical signals that allow them to transmit when they need to and to be dormant when they aren't transmitting. And again, we'll look at that in Chapter 2. Evolutionary psychology, adaptation, reproduction, natural selection. One of the things that distinguishes us from most animals is that we have a prefrontal cortex. We have the ability to make decisions, and we have the ability to make choices. So our executive functions, but at the beginning, most Cro-Magnon, most of the beginning species only reacted. They were animal natured, right? So they used the base of the brain stem, where most of your primal actions come from, and as a result, they existed. They fought, ate, died. But as the environment shifted and changed, because we have a prefrontal cortex, we have memories, and we can negotiate associative actions, we've adapted and increased the way that we respond to the environment, even in reproduction, right? Because now there's the ability not only to have reproduction as a result of male-female, but now you can do it through laboratory environments. So we've adapted based on the nature of the environment and the change. Sociocultural is also behavioral, but now it's about behavior between individuals. Remember, behavioral was about the individual self. Sociocultural is how does the social environment for folks, for people, increase the cultural beliefs and standards and foundations associated with that group. So sociocultural, evolutionary, biological, the others, those are the primaries. And so those are what we will look at just for now. Now, as I said, I'm going to step out for 2 minutes because I forgot my other markers. So I will be back in 2 minutes.
I want to say 4 o'clock, but I don't even know. Huh? I thought my teacher was a touchscreen today. I asked him to touch the screen. People switching into it.
Just to come back.
125, 170, something along that line. It's 3 and 3.
Yeah, it's down the hall. Yeah, well, it's on the call recording.
Is that what shows or something?
Yeah, water.
You said we
Yeah,
could.
drinks mostly.
Well, if you think about it, canned water is like chips. If you just bite harder.
It makes the same sense. I'm here. Right now, I'm real excited. Even my glasses on, I just see far away, but
It's probably like crackers and some like aluminum.
That's what I was thinking.
Fresh water. Oh my God.
I don't have necessarily regulation, but I see that I look at some fish, but I want to.
I would do that now.
All right, thanks for waiting. So any questions on those 7? On those 7? Okay. All right, now I'm not going to go through this list of specialties, but if anyone is interested, I have worked in probably all of these fields except as a clinical psychologist. So I don't have a lot of information. I know the background of it. I have not worked or have experience in it. But the others, I could probably have a conversation with you. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We can talk about it after class or before class if you get here soon enough. Now, since we're looking at this idea of it being scientific, now what did we say was the basis for psychology to be considered scientific?
Like
Yes.
you can prove it multiple times.
I'm sorry?
You can prove that it happens 95% of the time.
Okay, above 90, ideally 95, 97, 99,
I said
yes.
95.
You did?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
said
but 90 is also acceptable.
Yeah.
90% is acceptable. The best is 95, 97, 99. So thank you. Yeah, so we have the ability to create an experiment or a condition that will allow us to get results that are based on those conditions 90% or greater. Otherwise, if it's less than that, then we may consider that it's just as much due to luck as it is to those conditions. So we'll talk about significance in a minute. But in order to figure out those conditions, then we need to do research. And the research can either exist in one of 2 ways. It's either going to be because something already exists and we want to see if it is still in fact true. So here's a question. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, what did doctors prescribe for pregnant women to help them be calm during their pregnancies? Yes?
It was a thiamine.
No, it?
It was a anti, like the pill that was to help with young.
That came later.
Yeah.
Well, that, yeah, but you said like the calm down one.
Oh, sorry, I was.
That's okay, that's okay. Yes is a good guess. Yes.
Wasn't it some kind of opioid?
No, it wasn't.
Was it the one that gave the babies with all the birth defects?
that was
Yeah.
Oh,
That was
everything.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah, they may have used opioids, but they weren't prescribed. Huh?
The cocaine one?
No? I'm sorry. Cigarettes.
Oh, makes sense.
Wait,
So-
which period what?
Late 1800s, early 1900s. Because the idea was that nicotine calmed people down. People smoked because it made them cool, made them relaxed, made all of this stuff, but it was all visual. What they didn't know at the time was that the effect of nicotine severely decreased oxygen flow to the fetus and could also cause other damages. But basic research says, well, it's there. Somebody researched it, even if it's wrong. Somebody did it, but at the time it was right because there was nothing to refute it. Over time, though, they started to realize that, wait a minute, we need to look at this again. Cigarettes and nicotine are not good for embryos. They are not good for fetuses. And so the research changed. But again, the idea was that we already had knowledge that was incomplete. So basic research takes what's already existing and then expands it. Now, applied research designed to solve problems that we don't necessarily have prior data on? What's something that you guys are involved with right now?
Vape.
COVID,
Oh, okay.
right? Now, there may have been a variant of COVID, right, in the years prior, but COVID-19 and the Delta variant are new. And that's why it took so long to come up with some solutions. So applied research says we don't know because it didn't exist before. Let's figure it out now. So we have to look at other conditions, other variables. Cell phones. You didn't have Bluetooth technology until around 1992. So there was no existing data or prior data to say that Bluetooth technology existed. We didn't know that microwaves may have an impact, or cell phone signals may cause cancer, right? Because the knowledge, the technology didn't support it, so we didn't know it. So those two are segregated that way. Now, basic research, typically conducted in a laboratory, because again, we're setting up the conditions that we're testing to see if the result is accurate. Here, because we don't have those conditions to set up, we don't know what they are, they're generally conducted outside of the laboratory. It's observation, something like that. But those are the two primary types of research, and then we'll expand those from there. So think about something as simple as this, right? I don't know, but given the structure of these two range eyes, if this one represents this one, or because it's on top, it represents that one. I really don't know visually. However, these, I know visually, even though it's offset, now these are offset on top, which should represent that one. So theoretically, it makes it easier just to see and to respond to, react to. And those are the kind of things that you can use this kind of research and knowledge to figure out. But in order to create a theory, these 6 steps are always, always, always followed. You don't get to deviate. In order for a theory to be accepted, it has to go through these 6 steps. So the first step is the question and literature review. What do you think that represents? Why does that represent something? Yes?
So it's like where you ask if the experiment is true, and then look up what the factors are that you're going to be testing from previous.
That's very close. That's very close. The idea is, what is it that I'm interested in finding out about? Right? So you're right. What am I interested in finding out about? So I ask the question, right? And we're going to look at one. If my question is aggressiveness, question about aggressiveness between males and females, then I may want to look in the literature, look at other research to say, has anyone ever studied this before? And if they have, what were their findings? Back to nicotine, right? There was research, prior research, but that research was inconclusive. And so now, by doing the review, I'm not starting from ground zero. I'm starting from this place where other people either left off or didn't finish the review or the research. So once I ask the question or pose the question, and I find out if there's existing literature, the next step is to create a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is simply this. It is a statement of predictive truth. Statement of predictive truth. Now, we don't know that it's true, but we predict that it is. But in order to prove that, I have to do an experiment. So, people, I'm not picking on you yet, but people who sit in the front row with their cell phones, let me change that. Ladies who sit in the front row with their cell phones on their desk tend to pay less attention in class than men. No, don't move it. This is just an example. Than men who have their cell phones, right? Now, that could absolutely be false. I have no way of knowing that that's true. She may get the highest grade point average in the entire class. So it's simply a prediction. Now, in order for me to know if that's true or not, I have to test it. I have to do an experiment, right? And one of the experiments would be, as soon as you say that, we should pick our phone off the desk. All right, it worked. Okay. All right, so that's all a hypothesis is. I'm making a statement. Now that statement has to involve at least two variables. So I always have to have at least two or more variables. So I'm testing one thing against another. You have ladies who sit in the front with phones, XYZ, over men who sit in the front with phones. Right? Again, doesn't make it true. It's simply a predictive statement that I want to see if there's any validity to it. That's the hypothesis. So once I do that, how might I test that? How might I test if that's true or not? Yes?
Maybe like do like a test after a lesson with the phone on the desk between the both groups, and without the phone on the desk in the other group to test whether or not the scores would increase.
Okay, but what are my variables?
The things you change is whether or not the phone is on the desk.
Oh, there was something, but yes, it was something about the phone on the desk, but what was I measuring? I was measuring
The test scores?
ladies
Oh, ladies versus men.
to men, right? So what I would probably do, or what I could do, is in every class that I'm teaching, maybe there are 6 front seats. I ask 6 ladies who tend to always have their phone on the desk to be there, and then 3 guys. And in every class, I'll do that, and at the end of the semester, I'll look at their GPAs. Now, that is not definitive, it's not 100%, guaranteed. But I can say, whoa, man, based on the ladies who sat up there, their GPAs are higher. So maybe my hypothesis is wrong, right? Which leads me to this. When you create a hypothesis, there are 3 possible outcomes. What are they? Yes?
It's either going to be like a factual statement.
True.
To become correct. You'll be completely off, and it could be, I guess, the other way around.
Well, this is my experiment, so let's not use completely.
Okay.
Yeah.
The findings will not be what you predicted.
Okay, so it's true, false, or there's inconclusive. Those are the only 3 possibilities, right? My prediction was right, my prediction was wrong, or based on the data, there's no way to tell the difference between the 2 populations, okay? So once I have that hypothesis, I create the experiment. I do that. So what the experiment is going to be to test that. Once I set that up, now I need to find the people who are going to participate so that I can collect the data to make a decision about whether or not that data supports my hypothesis or not. So step 4 is data collection. So now I'll continue to get their grades, get their grades, get their grades, get their grades, and at the end of the semester, I'll analyze it to see if it's true or not. Based on that analysis, I'll publish the findings to say, well, based on this statement and the data collected, my hypothesis is false. Or my hypothesis is true. Or, based on the data that I got, I can't tell. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It has no value. Once I've published that, then I've done one of 2 things. I've either advanced a theory, or I've created another, or I've simply supported an existing theory. So those 6 steps, in order for you to validate and to have a theory accepted theory, you have to go through those 6 steps. Any questions? Okay. Actually, let's do an example. So, which shoes are, don't worry, I won't call you. Which shoes are most comfortable for taking a long walk? Now, that's rhetorical. Right? That's rhetorical, you don't have to answer that, I'm just setting up an example. So, my question would be that, which shoes are most comfortable for people who do long walks? I look at the literature review, and I'll look at the literature, and I'll look for different kinds of shoes. Who's done research on texture, colors, size, width, all of those things. And then my hypothesis may be that people who take long walks have more, let's see, I'm just going to make it up, Nike, tend to wear Nike shoes. Men who wear Nike shoes tend to be more comfortable than women who wear Nike shoes. Now, true? Absolutely no way of knowing. But I've set the hypothesis up. I have two variables, men who wear Nikes, women who wear Nike. Now, that's my hypothesis. How might I test that? What's my design?
You have two control groups and then you have them walk with Nike shoes.
Yeah, I get a lot of people, and either I provide them Nikes, hopefully the same ones, and let them walk. And then I may just ask at the end of it, how do your feet feel? I may look at their feet to see if they're red, see if they're calluses, whatever it is over time. But that's just the design. Now, once they start walking, and they continue walking, I'm collecting data from them related to that particular experiment. Once that's finished, I can say, you know what, based on what I saw, no, it's not true. It's okay, I can still publish it and say that this doesn't have any basis of fact, so let's not worry about that. That's not interesting to Nike. However, if it is true, that might be something I could sell my research to Nike and say, yep, you might be interested in this because here's your demographic. And then, so now I've developed a theory around comfortability for Nike shoes between male and female, right? That's it. So, well, that's not it, but that's the way this works. Now, once we have the theory or some of the areas that are part of that, we talked about hypothesis. So again, a tentative and testable explanation about the relationship between two or more variables. It's simply a prediction. It is not something that's based in truth. It's just something we're interested in, and as a result, we will find out if it's true or not. The operational definition is simply that. How do we figure out what are we going to do in order to test the validity of this prediction? So in that particular example, we're going to have people walk for long distances in Nike shoes to see if those cause calluses or whatever else. And then back to the 95, 97, 99, statistical significance. If you run it 1,000 times and 950 times out of 1,000, you get the results that you were looking for, then it is statistically significant. So if it's 95%, 97%, 99%, it is statistically significant. If it is less than 90%, it is then considered just as much luck as the conditions that we set up. So people getting calluses, if it's not above 90%, I can say, well, you know, it doesn't matter what tennis shoes or what shoes they wear, they still get calluses. But if 95% of the time they get calluses with Nike, then at least I can limit or at least look at my research and say, this does have validity. That Nike is either causes calluses, don't cause calluses, whatever it is. So that's what we're looking for. And the things that we're trying to achieve are these. Again, why does it matter? Who cares? Now, it may only be that person, but